Congressman Billy Tozan's, one of Congressman Tozan's aides on Capitol Hill, and he's back in Congress. He won last year, defeating Edwin Edwards with over 62% of the votes by more than 55,000 votes. And he has finished his first 6 months in Congress. Actually, he was elected on December 6th, so yeah, just finished his first 6 months in Congress. Here's Garrett Graves.
Not a good start, right?
And the Congressman brought his lovely bride, Carissa, and his 2 beautiful daughters.
Calla and Coco are here with us as well for a little bit of moral support. As we're walking up, Coco, the one to the left over there, said, "If I were you, I'd be really nervous." So I want to thank the Press Club for giving us the opportunity to come talk today. It's great to be back again, and I think perhaps under a little bit different circumstances than last time. You know, I've been up there for about 6 months now, and it's really been an amazing opportunity to be there. And being a freshman member of Congress, having 6 years of tenure under my belt, it's very challenging to explain how powerful you are. But I told a story a few days ago, and I'm going to tell it again to kind of give you an indication of my power and stroke in Washington. One of the things that freshman members of Congress get to do is they get to preside over the House chamber. They get to sit up on the very high dais with a big gavel and preside over the chamber. So a few months ago, I was up there and I was presiding, and all of a sudden, these security people start coming in from the left and the right side of the chamber, and the dais is very high. You're looking down on people, and it's makes you feel really important. And so I'm trying to watch these people that are scurrying in and having all these conversations and trying to figure out what's going on while at the same time do my job. And finally, one of the guys comes up and he says, "Sir, we think we have a security situation." We're like, "All right, well, what's going on?" And he goes, "Well, there's an unauthorized helicopter coming down the National Mall." Being a runner, I know that the mall is 2.5 miles long from the Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial, 2.5 miles. And being a mathematician whiz that I am, I know that helicopters go approximately fast, which if you do the math, it means you gotta make a decision quickly. And so, I look back at him and I come back up here. So he comes back and I'm like, "Look, what's the call here? We gotta make a decision. The thing's gonna be here in seconds." And so he's like, well, hold on. He goes running back down, and all the security guys. Meanwhile, I'm looking out of the chamber. Steve Scalise was just there. You all know, the congressman from the New Orleans area, and Steve was rushed out with his security detail. Other members of Congress were rushed out. Staff were all leaving. So I'm up here, very lonely in this chamber, looking around. I'm like, hey, look, everybody else is leaving. Scalise's security detail even rushed him out. Should I leave? "No, sir, you stay right there." So I'm not sure if that's my colleague's opinion of me, or if you're a sacrificial freshman, or how that works. But that was my experience, and that's my degree of importance, apparently. Something else that I think is really relevant. It's a quote that former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, I believe, used, and he said that Washington, D.C. is 65 square miles surrounded by reality. And again, I think it's indicative of what I've experienced being up there for the last 6 months. And I want to go through and talk about some of those things. Number one, in the last several months, there's been a proposal by the EPA to reduce the ozone standard to a standard that Yellowstone National Park cannot comply with. Yet here's Louisiana, and depending on how you do the math, we're either the top or the number 2 petrochemical state in the nation. BASF had the great commercial, "We don't make the products you buy, we make the products you buy better." And that's what our petrochemical industry does. Having this huge industry, it's not compatible with establishing air quality or ozone standards that a national park can't comply with it. We had this Waters of the U.S. rule that came down. And it was a rule that had tried to define what waters in the United States are. Sounds like a somewhat easy task. And the rule that was proposed, perhaps it works well in Wyoming, or other places. However, Louisiana is the state that drains from Montana to 2 Canadian provinces over to New York, one of the largest watersheds in the world. The hydrology here, the amount of water here is different than anywhere else in the country. Yet there are things in the definition that say things like, we potentially are going to claim jurisdiction over areas that drain rainfall. That's my front yard. Louisiana is different, and we've got to establish waters of the United States definitions or wetlands regulations that are compatible with the area, with an area like Louisiana that has one of the largest watersheds in the world. And unfortunately, under the proposed rule that I think the courts will throw out, again, I think that you're going to see extraordinary claims of jurisdiction by the EPA and the Corps of Engineers over private property. I think that it is going to adversely affect our efforts to expand economic development opportunities here in the state. And again, most importantly, I think that it's going to have an adverse effect on the value of private property across the state, and that's problematic. Y'all are familiar, or at least most of you, with efforts by the state of Louisiana to begin sharing offshore energy revenues. And you have heard for literally decades the story about President Truman offering the state of Louisiana 37.5% of the revenues from particularly oil and gas production. And you're familiar that in December of 2006, our congressional delegation was finally able to make some progress on that with the enactment of the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, sharing revenues from offshore energy production, from new offshore energy production, from leases that were issued after enactment of that bill. And so we were all looking very much forward to somewhere in the 2017, 2018 timeframe to see those hundreds of millions of dollars and ultimately billions of dollars begin flowing to the state of Louisiana. And importantly, the citizens here passed the constitutional amendment with one of the highest margins of any constitutional amendment, where they said those dollars are going to go to restoring the coast, to building hurricane and flood protection, to making our communities, to making our economy more resilient. That's important. We've already been through it. Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Rita, Hurricane Gustav, Hurricane Ike, and in 2012, Hurricane Isaac. We're vulnerable here. It's a good commitment of funds. It's a program that's going to yield billions of dollars in savings to the federal government, yet under the budget request that was submitted to Congress this year. After decades and decades of us fighting and finally winning, before the dollars start flowing, the budget request submitted to Congress proposed that that program be eliminated. And so once again, a disconnect. You know, you see the president is out there and he's talking about the need to promote free trade. And I agree. You can take the 20 countries we have free trade agreements with in the United States today, and we have a trade surplus. You take the remaining countries that we don't have free trade agreements with, and you have a trade deficit. However, there's a disconnect between what's happening at the federal level. You're out there promoting free trade, and I believe Americans have given the opportunity to compete on a level playing field. We can compete and win. The problem is that the playing field is increasingly not level. We've seen the regulations that I just talked about, whether it's the clean air or the water or this flood risk management standard, establishing a 500-year flood standard before federal investments can be put forth. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world. We have some of the most arduous labor compliance regulations in the world. These things make it more expensive and more difficult for us to do business, for us to compete on a level playing field with other countries. Free trade is great, and as I mentioned, we have a trade surplus with the 20 nations we have free trade agreements with because we can compete and win on a level playing field. However, fair trade is what's important. Free and fair. That's what trade needs to be. And there's a disconnect between policies coming out of Washington, particularly the White House, that are making us increasingly uncompetitive, tying the hands of American workers behind their back and their ability to compete with global trading partners. And it's problematic. You know, but we have had some wins in the 6 months that we've been there, despite being one of 435 members of Congress, despite the fact that they tried to take me out with a gyrocopter. We've had some wins, and it's been great. Number one, we were actually able to put a provision into a FEMA authorization bill moving through the process that's going to prevent FEMA from being able to retroactively change guidelines by which people are eligible for assistance, that communities, that homeowners, and others are eligible for assistance. It could potentially have an impact of hundreds of millions of dollars on our citizens in terms of FEMA retroactively trying to change the rules and then clawing back dollars that folks have already spent from our property owners in South Louisiana. And so we've been able to ensure that the rules can't change in the middle of the game. We've been able to passed legislation through the House of Representatives that would begin addressing the science flaws in how the federal government manages our fisheries in the offshore, particularly red snapper. We're blessed in Louisiana with abundant natural resources, but those resources need to be managed in a way that's sustainable and accessible. Accessible to the commercial industry, the charter for hire, and the recreational fishers. When I was a kid, I could go fish for red snapper every single day. And today, this year, the season went from June 1st to June 10th. Just 10 days, 2 fish per day, and that's it. We're the sportsman's paradise. We're the state that people love to get out in the outdoors. We don't have the mountains and the whitewater rivers and other things that people have around the nation to go out and recreate. It's what we do. Yet it's increasingly being put off limits. And so we were able to pass legislation number 1 through 1 bill that improves the science to ensure that we're properly managing the stocks based upon their true health, based upon science. Number 2, that prevents this roadblock between us and the recreational fishery, particularly the red snapper, and allowing us more access to those fisheries. And we're very excited about that opportunity. We passed legislation through the House of Representatives that we were very involved in that would require that the EPA and the Corps of Engineers go back to stakeholders, go back to governors, go back to states, go back to property owners, and talk to them about this waters of the United States rule, this new definition that potentially expands or that grossly expands the jurisdiction of the federal government over our private properties. It doesn't tell them they can't do it. It says you need to stop, you need to go engage stakeholders, you need to understand the repercussions. In places like South Louisiana, that's home to one of the largest watersheds in the world. And so that's passed the House of Representatives, and we're optimistic that the Senate will take it up. We've been working together with a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats to develop a new approach to the National Flood Insurance Program. I'm sure you all heard in 2012 when Congress passed the Bigger Waters Reform Act, you saw flood insurance rates literally exponentially increase for some property owners, commercial and residential, across South Louisiana, devaluing their property, taking money out of their pockets, and significantly harming, again, our ability for economic development, economic growth in South Louisiana. And so we're working together to come up with a more common sense approach as we work toward reauthorization of that bill. And lastly, another example is holding the Corps of Engineers accountable to what the law says. If they're out there trying to propose that waters in the U.S. rule needs to be expanded and all these waters and wetlands are so critically important, as the Corps of Engineers and EPA are saying, then why is it, on the other hand, you are out there, Corps of Engineers, causing the largest historic, current, and prospective wetlands loss in the United States, and you're not doing a damn thing about it? Dang thing about it. So we've made some progress there. And looking forward, we've got a number of other big things that we're working on. Number 1, some things we talked a good bit about on the campaign. We talked about bringing the budget back to reasonable levels. The fact that we're approaching $18 trillion in national debt is absolutely absurd. For what? Tell me what program out there is so critical that we can't afford to pull back a bit. So we were actually able to work with a group of other members of Congress. We proposed a budget framework that would bring it to balance within 5 years. And I want to be clear, I think we should do it this year. And there wasn't consensus to do it. We got a good group of members who worked together, and within 5 years we put forth a proposal, and unfortunately we couldn't get enough support to make it pass, but we did have a second proposal that was put forth that brings it to balance within 9 years. The budget request submitted to Congress this year was $500 billion, with a B, out of balance in 2016, yet raised taxes and fees by over $2 trillion over the next 10 years. That's ridiculous. This is absolutely mortgaging our future. It's putting our future, it's putting that debt upon generations like this. And I'm going to say it again, for what? What is so critical? Why is it that the federal government is so great and so efficient at spending dollars that we should continue overspending in these programs? So we're going to continue to work to reduce that 9-year window into something much closer to now. We're working on a transportation bill, which I know I heard over and over again during the campaign, and we hear it here over and over again now. It's great that we have that beautiful Audubon Bridge north of us. We need to pick it up and we need to move it right here to Baton Rouge. We need to properly prioritize the dollars that are there, the transportation dollars that are there. We need to make sure that that transportation trust fund is being spent in a transparent manner, is being spent only on road projects and priority transit projects that actually demonstrate a benefit to the public, that demonstrate a positive cost to benefit ratio. And so we're working on a 6-year transportation bill. My guess is we'll probably do that late this year. We are working to increase the investment in infrastructure, but I want to be clear. Raising taxes is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about increasing the investment by properly prioritizing the existing federal dollars that are out there, by ensuring that the states properly prioritize the federal dollars that are given to them for infrastructure investment. We've actually brought down the chairman of the Transportation Committee, Bill Schuster, brought him down here, showed him, South Louisiana showed him our role in national energy and petrochemical, in seafood, showed him the intermodal transportation system here. You don't have another state that has 5 of the top 15 ports in the United States. You don't have another state that has all 6 Class 1 rail lines, with the exception of the Chicago area, but they obviously don't have the intermodal interface here with the river system. He was absolutely mesmerized by the incredible infrastructure we have. And that's why Louisiana today is the top export state in the nation, and that shouldn't change. We should maintain that #1 position. And that includes deepening the Mississippi River system to ensure that we can handle the larger vessels that will be coming through the modernized Panama Canal over the next few months. One other big thing that's on the horizon, and just within coming days, King versus Burwell. One of the biggest things I heard on the campaign trail were folks expressing concern about how their insurance premiums had increased and the services they were getting had actually decreased. They were spending more money each month on their insurance premiums, but the coverage they were getting was worse than before. Higher deductibles, higher copays. And so, as you know, the House of Representatives has attempted to repeal, the Senate in some cases has attempted to pull back portions of the Affordable Care Act. And those have been unsuccessful, obviously, with this White House being big defenders. I want to be clear. I think providing insurance opportunities for the uninsured is a laudable goal and something we should all seek. However, I think the way that it's being done now is not the right approach. And so King versus Burwell is a case that basically would prohibit, or not prohibit, it would basically show that the law currently says that federal exchanges that were set up in states, so the 34 plus states that did not establish Obamacare exchanges, that they could not have the federal subsidies there because the law doesn't provide it. If the court rules in favor of the plaintiffs, in favor of King, you're going to see a large component of the Affordable Care Act drop out. And I think it will give Congress leverage with the White House to come in and make some changes to the program that I think will be more affordable for all and provide better coverage in the Act. And so that's something within the next week the Supreme Court is likely to rule. And so something we're going to have to watch very closely. I think it's incumbent upon Congress to ensure that the 133,000 people in the state of Louisiana and the millions around the country don't overnight lose the subsidies. We've got to ensure that there's a reasonable transition in there, and that we're very transparent in how we expect the reforms to take place. Last thing I want to say is this, because I want to make sure there's ample time for questions. Actually, I'm kidding, because I told him I was going to filibuster and try and talk straight through to 1 o'clock. But last thing I want to say is this. We're coming back every weekend. The family's staying here, and we're flying back and forth. So generally go up early Monday morning, coming back Thursday night or Friday, and doing meetings on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We've hosted, on average, 2 town hall meetings per month. We've engaged thousands through our tele-town halls, where we get on the phone. We've actually posted conference call phone numbers on our website and on our Facebook pages saying, call in if you want to talk. We've done open office hours in our district office here in Baton Rouge, and just allowed anyone from the public to come in to ensure that we're engaging people. Because you can't represent what you don't know. And it's critical that we continue to have that engagement. We've opened up the district office here in Baton Rouge off of Corporate Boulevard. We've opened up one in Livingston Parish in the town of Livingston, right off the interstate. We've opened up one in Thibodaux on the Nichols campus, and continuing to be available and engaged with constituents. We've nearly hired up everyone for all the staff positions in our office, and things are absolutely running. You know, people often ask, how's it going and do you like the job? And you know, candidly, it's one of the most frustrating jobs I've ever done in my life. In my last job, after much work, we put together a very efficient organization. I worked in our family business that ran as an efficient organization. Because you know what? In the case of working for the state, it was a life or death situation. We couldn't afford to be inefficient. The federal government couldn't afford to be inefficient because they were going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars responding to storms as we pick up body bags and put lives and businesses and homes back together. It was critically important that that mission at the state was done successfully. And again, in the family business, there's competition all over the place. And so we've got to be efficient there in ensuring in private businesses, because otherwise you're eliminated. The federal government has a monopoly. It has a monopoly. There's no incentive for them to be efficient, which is part of the reason why the overspending is so extraordinary. And so it's frustrating because you walk into a place like that after coming out of an efficient organization and looking around and seeing very little that actually works efficiently, that actually works well. And it's an incredibly frustrating environment. But I'll say again, we're making progress. We're making progress one step at a time. I knew this wasn't going to be an overnight deal where we walked in and a few days later everything was fixed. But we're making progress. We're engaging people on a regular basis. The door's open, the phone's open, and looking forward to continuing the opportunity to represent South Louisiana. Look forward to any questions you have.
Garrett, you think I know you pay Bill Sherman. I know your pace is hectic up there. You think an 86-year-old man can be doing what you do?
For the record, 87. Look, you know, Governor Edwards is really just an incredibly witty, sharp guy. I was very much impressed by his wit and how sharp he was. I think that the pace can be as aggressive as you want it to be. Really, I've seen people up there who take a very laid-back, lackadaisical approach to the job, and I've seen people that take it very seriously and work really hard. I'm not going to say anything bad about Governor Edwards. I'll just say that I think this job can be as busy or as hectic as you want it to be, depending on how seriously you take it. And we're staying really busy. We're taking it seriously, and we're making progress. And I think that's what it takes.
Garrett, on the transportation, is there anything the federal government can do, and particularly in the case of Baton Rouge, particularly on the bridge?
Yeah.
You alluded to the bridge. Or do you see that as something that the legislature and the state and the Texas governor are going to have to grapple with, mostly outside whatever the federal government might be able to offer?
Sure. So the role of the federal government in transportation. So right now, about 18.3 cents per gallon of gasoline and 18.4 cents and 24.4 cents, 24.4 cents a gallon of diesel goes to the Highway Trust Fund, the Federal Highway Trust Fund. Those dollars largely turn around and come back to states and are used to pay for, in general, 80% of the cost of transportation projects on the federal system. Number one, I think it's critical that we focus those dollars on the priority projects. I think that in many cases there have been projects that have received federal funds that have not been the highest priority. I want to be clear on how that works. Those dollars are given to the state transportation agencies. They develop the priorities. There is some federal criteria, but there's a good bit of latitude that the states are given in terms of determining priorities. I think when you look back historically, and we referenced a project earlier today, there have been projects that have received funding as a result of politics as opposed to merit. I think that you can call me biased if you want. I will say that there is not a higher transportation need in the state of Louisiana than addressing the bottleneck here. We have been meeting together with Parish President Uso from Riverville Parish, Berthelot from West Baton Rouge. We've met with Mayor Holden here, Tommy Martinez over in Ascension Parish, and Leighton Ricks in Livingston Parish, as well as other parish council folks and others, business and community leaders, to talk about what makes sense. One of the biggest obstacles, and I want to be clear, this problem should have been anticipated 40 years ago. It should have been, should have been well on a path to having it addressed by now. So we're dealing with, similar to the coast, we're dealing with decades of lack of planning, lack of priorities, lack of attention. And so we've been meeting with the 5 regional leaders in an effort to try and bring folks to consensus. As you're aware, numerous solutions have been put forth over the last several years, but they've been shut down because of political challenges in many of the adjacent parishes. And so we're trying to bring them together to begin working toward short-term solutions, which, look, I get it, those aren't going to be the silver bullet, but just showing that we can cooperate on a regional basis. I think we're making progress there. The idea is we build upon that progress, move to intermediate solutions and then long-term solutions. I think the role of the federal government is 1, I think it's our role to help bring people together. 2, ensure that the proper resources are being invested from the federal level. 3, ensuring that we have federal laws and policies in place that allow for public-private partnerships and other solutions that will be that will ensure that the resources can be put toward where we need solutions. And lastly, ensuring that those highway transportation trust fund dollars are being put toward the top priorities and not being used on political favors or other ancillary lower priority investments.
Are there short-term solutions beyond what's being done now?
All right, so put me here, make me king for the day. I'll tell you a few things that I think are possibilities. Number 1, in the vicinity of the Washington Street exit, I want to be crystal clear. I'm not saying close Washington Street. It is the only place in the nation where the interstate system drops down to 1 lane. It's ridiculous. We need to fix that immediately. I think that there are potentially some solutions in there that will not have an adverse impact on the adjacent community. And I think we need to prioritize that in regard to preventing that bottleneck that backs up across the bridge. LA1, Gulf Intracoastal Waterway, the access on the west side of the river needs to be fixed. I think we need to make improvements to LA30, Nicholson, everywhere from downtown LSU down into Ascension Parish, where it reaches the Cabela's I-10 vicinity. There are some short-term improvements that are being looked at now between I-10 and Ashland on LA30 there. The old bridge needs some rehab and improvements to make sure it remains a viable option. You're probably aware of AECOM, a private firm, has put forth about an $800 million unsolicited proposal known as the bump that would improve, it would make some significant investments in Airline Highway from I-12 across the old bridge, connecting in 415 on the west side. I think that we need to improve access from 415 on the southern side of the interstate, connecting into LA1. We need to improve LA1, and we need to improve access to the Sunshine, Audubon, and the Gramercy Wallace bridges. Those things that I said, those aren't, you're not out there, well, with the exception of the connection from 415 Lobdell to LA1, you're not talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. In many cases, these solutions, shorter term solutions, lower dollar, things that can be done within the next several months or maximum next 2 years. Those are things we need to be knocking out of the park right now. We need to be prioritizing and getting done. Concurrently, as you know, there's a study that the Department of Transportation has kicked off that is going to study improvements from Lobdell, 415 on the west side, all the way to the 10-12 split. That study, again, should have been done 40 years ago. And but it is going to use traffic models to help propose some additional solutions. Ultimately, we need a bridge.
Just one other thing, if you don't close the Washington Street exit, what might you do to help with the...
I'd like to figure out if we can reconfigure the existing footprint to accommodate the lanes. And you know, look, I'm not going to stand here and try and be a transportation expert, but I'll throw out a few things. Is it possible to shorten that exit lane and squeeze a second lane in there within the existing footprint, which would largely be restriping as opposed to repaving? And so I think that there may be some opportunities along those lines. Again, being sensitive to the community there, but you got to think about the extraordinary impact that bottleneck has, and that the road backs up for miles and miles.
You're talking about the possibility of a second lane between the bridge and the exit north.
Yeah.
You were talking about the EPA and everything. You were talking about a rule that some rules that the EPA was proposing that Congress was opposing, and then you said that the only way to stop those rules from going into effect was through a court ruling. So are you saying or admitting that EPA is stronger than Congress?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I must have miscommunicated there. So one, we passed a bill called the Regulatory Integrity Protection Act. We passed that through Congress, HR 1470. No, 76, yeah, maybe 71, 1471. We passed that through the House, and what it would do is it would prevent the EPA from moving forward, from implementing the rule, from applying the rule, enforcing it, and it would require them to engage stakeholders and require that certain stakeholder engagement occur before they can finalize the rule and actually enforce it. So we're pushing the Senate to take that bill up and move it. That is the effort, that's the role of Congress, is for us to pass laws. Secondly, we're going to be doing an interior environment appropriations bill within the next few weeks. We do plan on continuing to push for and maybe even bolstering a provision that will be in the bill that will restrict the EPA and EPA's ability to enforce the rule until certain conditions are met. And then lastly, what I'd said is, as was the case with two previous rules that were proposed, under the Rapanis and under the Swank decisions, the Supreme Court actually threw out the rule that the EPA and the Corps of Engineers had written that defined waters of the U.S. in both cases, saying that it was too broad and didn't comply with what the statute said, the Clean Water Act.
So, in other words, if the EPA doesn't agree with Congress, the only way that Congress can stop something is through a federal court ruling?
We would pass a law. We would pass a law such as the Regulatory Integrity Protection Act, or we would restrict their appropriations, a funding restriction that would prohibit them from applying the rule during the fiscal year. So both of those are options that we're pursuing. I said separately that long term, I do not think that definition would withstand a Supreme Court ruling. Meaning, I think the Supreme Court would throw it out as it did the two previous. Yes, sir.
Yeah, when you were talking about transportation, when you were local, we had the Nicholson Drive corridor, where we want to run the streetcar through that.
Yeah. Yes, sir, I am. And I've actually, we met with officials from the U.S. Department of Transportation within the last maybe 3 weeks to talk to them about their involvement in the project. There was a grant that was awarded. It was largely a planning grant that was awarded. We spent a lot of time meeting with State Department of Transportation, with the Baton Rouge Area Foundation and others on that project. I was involved in the Water Campus project, which is just on the south side of the bridge, which is designed to help bridge the gap between downtown and LSU. And I think that ensuring that corridor connectivity is really important for the future of Baton Rouge.
And it also connects IBM.
That's right. Yes, it's a good point. Yeah, the IBM project as well. Yeah, and look, I mean, all the change we see downtown in the last several years, it really is amazing and fantastic to see. Downtown is a beautiful, incredible resource for us to start to open up the river and access to it and seeing it. I think it's fantastic, and I think we need to continue to make those sorts of investments here. Yeah.
I think he had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
No problem. As you pointed out, you had a fairly prominent role in the Jindal administration. Would you care to express as to how actively involved you may be in helping him to succeed in his presidential quest that will be announcing in a couple of days?
I got to tell you, I really enjoyed that job, that work, the progress that we made in making communities in South Louisiana more resilient, and restoring the coast, making the ecosystem more resilient. One of the best jobs I've ever had in my life, and being able to make a difference in people's lives and making our community more resilient. I wouldn't trade that for for other jobs, as it was just a good opportunity. Number one, I think it'd be great to finally have a president from Louisiana. We haven't had one of those, and I think that'd be fantastic. The other thing is that in the Republican Party right now, on that side, you have a number of fantastic candidates that are in the race, and I think it's great that we're going to have an opportunity to have good candidates out there for Americans to be able to choose from. I'll tell you from my perspective, seeing a change in the administration is something that I very much will welcome, and I look forward to watching this race evolve.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Yes, sir.
Back to highways and so forth, both on highways,
Yeah.
Mr. Schuster's committee and Ways and Means, there's been talk about a compromise, do some of the things that the House wants in exchange for an increase in the gas tax that hasn't been increased since 1992, 93.
Yeah.
Are you ruling out voting for that if there should be a compromise bill?
Yeah. I'm gonna go back and make reference to a few things. I'll make reference to what I mentioned earlier the tax rate that was set, static figure, 18.4 cents for gas and 24.4 cents for diesel. Numbers were set in 1993, and they haven't changed. How many of you would like to be making the same salary as you did in 93? It doesn't have the buying power. So clearly, there is an investment issue from the federal government. Secondly, and this is something I didn't talk about, there are conflicting federal policies that are out there today. There's something known as CAFE standards, a corporate average fuel economy. And what that is where the federal government, the Department of Transportation, comes in and requires that automobile manufacturers meet a certain average miles per gallon across their fleet. And they have increased that number over the last several years. So what that does is it makes cars more efficient, makes people buy less gas per mile driven. And so you've got, one, that there has not been a cost of living adjustment since 1993 on that 18.4 cent tax. Two, the federal government is further depressing the income from that revenue stream by increasing the corporate average fuel economy standards. So, I mean, look, it's crystal clear. Why is there a lack of federal investment? I mean, you can read it. Here's what I think. Number one, I think we've got to take a fresh look at the trust fund. We're paying for things right now out of that trust fund that are not priorities. And it's everything from paying for transit, and I want to be clear on this, paying for transit services in some cases that is not yielding a comparable public benefit. I'll tell you right now, in my neighborhood, I watch empty buses drive by every single day. They're beautiful. They need to have people on them, or they shouldn't be running. It's wasting money. And so we need to be making sure, you know, and I've referenced other bridge projects and other projects in the state of Louisiana that aren't priorities. You have other programs that are not related to actually addressing traffic problems that are funded out of the Highway Trust Fund right now. We've got to go back and look at those. Number two, I think that we've got to increase the ability for the state and for parishes and local governments to participate in public-private partnerships. We referenced earlier the bump project on an airline highway where a private company wants to come in and invest perhaps $800 million or more and attempt to recoup their dollars through a toll to be operated by that company in the future. I'm not here blessing the project. I want to see what the science says. I want to see what the traffic models say. But that type of project, I think, is something that makes an awful lot of sense. And so long term, the gas tax as the user fee to pay for the highway program it needs to go. You have electric vehicles today. I appreciate them. I support innovation. They're freeloaders if you're driving one. Your hybrid vehicle, you're getting a discount. The gas tax is supposed to be a user fee. It's no longer an accurate metric of what folks are, or how folks are using the highways. And so we've got to go back and take a fresh look at that and ensure that we have the right collection point. I'll give you an example. I believe it's the state of Oregon that is doing a highway miles. They're actually, depending on how many miles you drive in your car, you pay a fee based upon that. I'm not endorsing that idea, as I think it's got some privacy issues. I think it's got some collection point issues. It's going to be more expensive to collect it as well. But it is a more accurate metric of who's using the highways and how you're using them. And I think that we've got to continue to look at that. Congressman Graves, who's on the Ways and Means Committee, and I have discussed it a good bit. They've had one hearing already. I believe they have another one. I think it's maybe even this week or next, looking at different new financing mechanisms. But long term, the one that's there now is not sustainable. Yes.
I was going to ask you about water and water issues. Obviously, in Louisiana, we have an average rainfall of 64 inches a year, as opposed to California, Southern California, 14 inches on average, and it's been less than that lately. With the drain on our water tables, on our aquifers, could we go the way of California if we don't set some sort of comprehensive state water policy in place regarding fresh water?
Sure. Yes. So number one, we need to bottle our stuff here and send it to California and sell it, and address our budget problems and many other things. And in some cases, I'm sure people would be more than happy to bottle the water that's flooding inside their home. But seriously, you know what? I think that. Look, you can read the numbers. You see the aquifer levels here in this region. They're not sustainable. Baton Rouge was often given accolades for having one of the best freshwater sources in the nation. That's something that we need to be proud of, something that we need to protect. I think we need to take a fresh look at our water policy here in this region, in the capital region, as well as in the state. As you know, there was a water board, a groundwater commission that was put together that was charged with looking at some of these policies. I think that it is high time that we revise how we use our aquifers and ensure that we do it in a sustainable manner. But look, I'm not saying that we go out there today and say, hey, industry, you can't tap the aquifers anymore. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we need to very quickly get in there, discuss what transition options there are that are available to us. We've got the Mississippi River right there. I think that just about everyone would argue that in many cases in the year we have incredible excess of water. And I think that there's some solutions there that government can get involved in and perhaps provide transition assistance to ensure that we can continue to have the best of both worlds.
We have time for one more question.
Yes, sir.
Congressman Graves, you mentioned you had the Transportation Secretary down here. Did he give you, after leaving that, any kind of commitment to say, hey, I'm going to look and try to address this some way? I know he doesn't handle the budget, but some way to pour more money, federal money down here to help some of the traffic flows we have?
Sure. So one, I just want to clarify, it was the chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. However, we are working on, whose name is Bill Schuster, we are working on getting the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Fox, down here in the near future. Chairman Schuster was really amazed at the really incredible role, as I mentioned before, that Louisiana is really this intermodal state, and that we have the maritime and the Mississippi River system that you can't replicate anywhere in this country. We have the port infrastructure that you can't replicate anywhere in this country. 6 Class 1 rail lines, Chicago and this region are the only 2 places in the nation that have all 6 Class 1 rail lines. We have airports, of course, in this region as well, with excess capacity. So we talked about, he was really amazed by the role that our state plays in energy, in powering this nation's economy, and really amazed by the maritime in particular. So what we talked about, because there are not earmarks in Congress anymore with the earmark ban that's there, and so our ability to come in and say, hey, we're going to earmark X dollars for a bridge, those are practices of the past. However, what I talked about, I said, how about creating a program that addresses any interstate in the country that drops down to 1 lane? Not an earmark. And so we have had discussions about some options that would perhaps allow us to compete on some programs that would make a lot of sense in allowing us to make some headway on some of the real bottlenecks or challenges in this region. And this is going to, if we don't address it, it is going to strangle our economy. I've already talked to people that have had health effects and challenges in getting to the hospital from across the river and things like that. And certainly those stories are not going to decrease, they're going to increase if we don't do something about it. Dow, for example, has had to run their own ferry from Plaquemine, shuttling some of their employees across the river. That's not right. It's just not. We need to be more aggressive. And like I said, this is something that should have been addressed, or at least on a path to being addressed 40 years ago.
All right, Congressman, thank you.
All right, thank you all very much.